Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a book haul for the month of December. I think there are about 10 books to discuss here. I'm really excited about all of them and really happy to share them with you. There will be affiliate links to these in the description box down below if you'd like to check out more information about any of them. If you follow along, you know that November was my largest book haul ever, so this is pretty significantly scaled down from that. We're sort of returning to baseline a little bit, and my wallet is a little bit relieved for that. I do want to quickly shout out some people that helped with bringing some of these into my library. Those people are Julia Berg, Tara Vincent, Stacey Payne, and Marsha Johansson. They either sent some of these books directly or called in a gift card or used Super Thanks and called in a gift card to Montana Book Company. That is something I hadn't really anticipated that people would do, but it's a lovely thing. So again, thank you to Julia Berg, Tara Vincent, Stacey Payne, and Marsha Johansson for being just kind and wonderful people. So let's jump in and talk about the 10 books. You can probably see what the first one I want to talk about is. North Woods by Daniel Mason. I have been hoping that I would cram this in before the end of the year. We're coming down to the wire. Don't know if I'll make it. And I had been thinking that I wanted to read this in print, and let me flip and show. Part of the reason is that there are these little like illustrations and advertisements and things in the book itself that I kind of want to be able to experience as I read. So I figure, even though the audio is out there and exists, I kind of want to make sure I do the book in its physical form and have like the full experience of like the little photos and illustrations and things like that. This is one of the biggest books of 2023. It's been on the New York Times Top 10 and a bunch of others. I'll have a couple of them down below if you'd like to check that out in the description box. So it also feels like a front runner for the Pulitzer Prize alongside James McBride for the Heaven and Earth grocery store. And for that reason, I'm definitely wanting to read this before the Pulitzer Prize announcement is made next year. So I want to try to get it in before the end of this year if possible. I'm really down to the wire, but definitely before the Pulitzer Prize announcement is made. Here is what it says on the inside flap. A sweeping novel about a solitary house in the woods of New England told through the lives of those who inhabit it across the centuries, a daring, moving tale of memory and fate. When two young lovers abscond from a Puritan colony, little do they know that their humble cabin in the woods will become the home of an extraordinary succession of human and non-human characters alike. An English soldier destined for glory abandons the battlefields of the New Worlds to devote himself to growing apples. A pair of spinster twins navigate war and famine, envy and desire. A crime reporter unearths an ancient mass grave only to discover that the earth refuses to give up its secrets. A lovelorn painter, a sinister conman, a stalking panther, a lusty beetle. As the inhabitants confront the wonder and mystery around them, they begin to realize that the dark, raucous, beautiful past is very much alive. Daniel Mason has been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize before, so there are a lot of conversations to be had about why he could potentially end up winning a Pulitzer Prize next year. In my book hauls, I like to read a little bit from the opening of the book. By the way, this is published by Random House, so let's read a bit from the opening of North Woods by Daniel Mason. I keep calling it The North Woods, and it's just North Woods, so please bear with me. But here's a little bit from the beginning of the book. They had come to the spot in the freshness of June, chased from the village by its people, following deer path through the forest, the valleys, the fern groves, and the quaking bogs. Fast they ran. Steam rose from the fens and meadows. Bramble tore at their clothing, shredding it to rags that hung about their shoulders. They crashed through thickets, hid in tree hollows and bear caves, rattling sticks before they slipped inside. They fled as if it were a child's game, as if they had made off with plunder. My plunder, he whispered, as he touched her lips. It's the opening of North Woods by Daniel Mason. I'm really hoping to read that before the end of the year, but we're so against the deadline here that I don't know that it's going to happen, but I have really high hopes for that book. Now we have Blackouts by Justin Torres. This is published by FSG. This also recently won the National Book Award for fiction, and I felt very smug because I kind of predicted, especially based on the shortlist, that it was going to win. I'll put my reaction to the National Book Award in the description box down below. It's a bit of a difficult cover to hold up because with it being so dark, it's hard to really appreciate the detail. Let me see if I can let you see that at least. And I'm really looking forward to reading this. This is another one that has some visual elements in it. So I actually had access to the audio, and then I asked a friend, if I read the audio, am I going to be missing out? And they said, yeah, I don't know how this would even work in audio format, because there is so much going on in the book itself that I don't know how you would get the full experience. Yeah, I mean, there are even sections, I'm trying to see if I can find one, where there are redacted portions of a piece of text that almost forms a piece of poetry or text. And for that reason, I felt like I just really wanted the physical book. It should be really interesting. Here is what it says on the inside flap. Out in the desert, in a place called the Palace, a young man tends to a dying soul, someone he once knew briefly, but who has haunted the edges of his life. Juan Gay. Playful raconteur, child lost and found and lost. Guardian of the institutionalized, Juan has a project to pass along, one built around a true artifact of a book. Sex Variance, a study of homosexual patterns, and its devastating history. This book contains accounts collected in the early 20th century from queer subjects by a queer researcher, Jan Gay, whose groundbreaking work was then co-opted by a committee, her name buried. The voices of these subjects have been filtered, muted, but it is possible to hear them from within and beyond the text, which in Juan's tattered volumes has been redacted with black marker on nearly every page. As Juan waits for his end, he and the narrator recount for each other moments of joy and oblivion. They resurrect loves, lives, mothers, fathers, minor heroes. In telling their own stories and the story of the book, they resist the ravages of memory and time. The past is with us, beside us, ahead of us. What are we to create from its gaps and erasures? Sounds really fascinating, and I love the idea that it is sort of exploring those blackouts and finding life and truth and story in a void and what has been erased. And I love that it is also about queer stories and how they have been historically erased. And I am looking forward to this book. Justin Torres gave a really fascinating interview about that on NPR's Book of the Day, and had the process of writing the book and what he intended to do. Just really very fascinating. Here is a bit from the opening of this book. It opens with one of those blackouts. Let's go to the first little block of text. I came to the palace because the man I sought kept a room there. He stood at the point of egress, supporting himself against the doorframe, not just thin, but skeletal, lips shrunken and chapped, the skin of his face pulled taut over the skull. I led him back to the bed, where he looked at me, kind yet wild. His eyes burned with life, as if the spirit had left the flesh and concentrated there, in irises bright and glassy, the milk of the whites unsullied. That is the opening of Blackouts by Justin Torres. Now, if you follow along, you know that Joel and I are planning a trip to Ireland in 2024, and I'm hoping to read a bunch of Irish and Scottish authors before we go, because we'll be in Scotland as well. And this is something that actually Anne Patchett talked about on the Instagram for her bookstore, Parnassus, and sounded interesting. And I looked into it, and the more I looked into it, the more interesting it sounded. And my local used bookstore happened to have a copy, so I cashed in some trade to get a copy of This Is Happiness by Niall Williams. This is published by Bloomsbury, and it just sounds like a really interesting book. I'm definitely hoping to get to this before we go to Ireland. It's a bit of a chunky monkey. It's 380 pages. I have heard a little bit that it can be a bit on the slow side, but that the overall story is just really beautiful and moving, so I'm looking forward to that. Here's what it says on the back of the book. The rain is stopping. Nobody in the small, forgotten village of Faha remembers when it started. Rain on the western seaboard was a condition of living. Now, just as Father Coffee proclaims the coming of electricity, it is stopping. 17-year-old Noel Crow is standing outside his grandparents' house shortly after the rain has stopped when he encounters Christy for the first time. Though he can't explain it, Noel knows right then something has changed. This is the story of all that was to follow, Christy's long-lost love and why he had come to Faha, Noel's own experiences falling in and out of love, and the endlessly postponed arrival of electricity, a development that once complete would leave behind a world that had not changed for centuries. I mean, it sounds fascinating to me. I hope you agree, but I am looking forward to reading this. I hope I can get it in before we leave for Ireland and Scotland, because there's just a lot to accomplish by then. And what's really interesting about the beginning of this book is that chapter 1 is only one single sentence. It had stopped raining. Do I want to give a little bit of a tease of how chapter 2 begins? Let's just say nobody in Faha could remember when it started. Rain there on the western seaboard was a condition of living, which is kind of calling back to the language on the back of the book. Interesting. Anyway, it is also described as a profound and enchanting novel from Man Booker Prize longlisted author Niall Williams about the loves of our lives and the joys of reminiscing. And obviously this goes back to when it was the Man Booker Prize and not just the Booker. Now we have 2 books that are coming out in 2024. I actually reached out to the publishers and they were kind enough to send me review copies. The first is from Tin House. It's How We Named the Stars, a novel by Andres N. Ordorica. This is publishing on January 30th. I will have affiliate links on bookshop.org to all of these books. If you use the ones for this one and the next one we're going to talk about, it will be for a pre-order. Or you can do it with your local independent bookstore, or you can support your local library. But if you are interested, pre-order, reach out to your library, make sure they will be getting a copy. These are things that sound really interesting to me. Here's the description of this book. When Daniel de la Luna arrives as a scholarship student at an elite East Coast university, he bears the weight of his family's hopes and dreams, and the burden of sharing his late uncle's name. Daniel flounders at first, but then Sam, his roommate, changes everything. As their relationship evolves from brotherly banter to something more intimate, Daniel soon finds himself in love with a man who helps him see himself in a new light. But just as their relationship takes flight, Daniel is pulled away, first by Sam's hesitation, and then by a brutal turn of events that changes Daniel's life forever. As he grapples with profound loss, Daniel finds himself in his family's ancestral homeland in Mexico for the summer, facing a host of new questions. What will Ithaca mean without Sam? How does the person he is connect with this place his family comes from? And how might he reconcile the many parts of himself as he learns to move forward? Speaks to a lot of things that interest me as a reader. Can't wait to read it, and hopefully you will agree. Let's do a bit of the opening of this book. And this comes from Tin House, which is a publisher that I have really grown to appreciate over time. They did Morgentalti's Night of the Living Res. They will be doing Morgentalti's upcoming book as well. Here is how this book begins. I'm going to skip over the prologue and begin with day 1. August 23rd, 1989. It begins with a note. Sometimes I dream of another life, one in which leaving this town does not scare me. I feel a call inside me as deep as a canyon, animal-like, instinctive in knowing. Often it comes in the form of silences, like in the dark of night when I wander home alone, drunk from the bar. I will be working under lamplight, kicking up the dust of the road, and I'll hear it. It brings me to a complete standstill. The voice will often tell me how there is something bigger out there, something bigger than what I've grown up believing. We'll leave it at that. That is the beginning of How We Named the Stars, a novel by Andres N. Ordorica, publishing on January 30th, 2024. Here's the other upcoming book, Greta and Valden, a novel by Rebecca K. Riley. This is a bestseller in New Zealand that is making its way over to the United States. It will be published on February 6th. So again, if this is something that sounds interesting to you, pre-order, preferably at your local independent bookstore. Make sure your library will be getting a copy of it, and go from there. This is from Avid Reader Press. Here is the description of the book. It's been a year since his ex-boyfriend dumped him and moved from Auckland to Buenos Aires, and Valden is doing fine. He has a good flat with his sister Greta, a good career where his colleagues only occasionally remind him that he is the sole Maori person in the office, and a good friend who he only sleeps with when he's sad. But when his work sends him to Argentina and he's thrown back into his former lover's orbit, Valden is forced to confront the feelings he's been trying to ignore and the future he wants. Greta is not letting her painfully unrequited crush, or her possibly pointless master's thesis, or her pathetic academic salary get her down. She would love to focus on having fun with her similarly flailing friends and the charming fellow grad student she meets at a party, but her chaotic family life won't stop intruding. Her mother is keeping secrets, her nephew is having a gay crisis, and her brother Valden has suddenly flown to South America without a word. Sharp, hilarious, and with an irresistible emotional momentum that builds to an exuberant conclusion, Greta and Valden careens us through the siblings' misadventures and the dramas big and small of their sprawling, eccentric, Maori Russian Catalonian family. It's a national bestseller in New Zealand, and it just sounds really interesting. I believe it was compared to The Royal Tenenbaums in the description of the book that I first saw, and that really sold me hard. I'm a huge fan of The Royal Tenenbaums. It's one of my favorite movies. Even though I haven't really gotten along with Wes Anderson's other or subsequent movies as well, that to me is just absolutely wonderful. Here's a bit from the opening of Greta and Valden. Chapter 1, Sender. I come back to the apartment and find the worst thing in the world. A yellow postcard has been shoved between the door and its frame. This is not a postcard that says something like, I wish you were here with me on the Costa del Sol, or why didn't you tell me the Camino de Santiago is full of slow-moving retirees? This is a postcard that says, card to call. It means that someone has arrived at my apartment with a package after driving through the narrow city streets, probably double parking, and walking up 6 flights of stairs, and then, seeing as I wasn't there, because it was the middle of the day on a Wednesday, and I do have some semblance of a life, has taken the package away again. Now I will have to go through the stress of relocating this product in whatever mystery location it happens to be in. I hope it's not Penrose, because I don't have a car. That is the opening of Greta and Valden, a book that is coming out in the United States on February 6th from Avid Reader Press, and a national bestseller in New Zealand. Really looking forward to reading this one as well. It sounds so good and like something that really captures a lot of my interests in reading, so I can't wait to read it. The next thing is something I have actually already read. Joel and I have just been wanting to get a copy of it to keep in our library. We had been hoping for a hardcover. We settled for a paperback. It's The Soul of an Octopus, a surprising exploration into the wonder of consciousness by Sy Montgomery. We have become huge Sy Montgomery fans at this point. I read Of Time and Turtles this year. Absolutely loved it. We read How to Be a Good Creature by her this year. Absolutely loved it. I'm kind of thinking I want to read The Hummingbird's Gift, which is a really short book by her. Absolutely loved it. And one of the fun things about the physical book, we listened to it on audio originally. We listened to all of her books on audio originally because she reads them herself, and her voice just has this sense of wonder and love and admiration, and it's very powerful to listen to her. But the physical books are always really beautiful. And the fun thing about Soul of an Octopus is that, I don't know if you can see, it's got a little flip book of an octopus right there in the corner. It also has, photos, which I kind of just glossed over. But yeah, fun little flip book. So the octopus moves as you flip the pages. Lots of fun. Basically, I'm not going to read the back of this book since I've already read it. Sy Montgomery worked at an aquarium for a time and really got to know octopuses who were there and the lives of the people who care for them. And she always tells really interesting stories about the people and about the octopuses, and she really gets to know them. The book, of course, because these are animals with very short lifespans, there is a very sad part where some of the octopuses that she works with die through the course of the book. But she manages to write about potentially difficult things like loss in very beautiful ways that feel very cathartic to me. I'm a huge fan of her work. She's becoming like an Instabuy author for me, and I would love to have a collection of her stuff. We actually just got some of her children's books for a niece of ours recently, and I just am a huge fan of hers. Here's a bit from the opening of the book. Chapter 1 is called Athena, Encountering the Mind of a Mollusk. On a rare warm day in mid-March, when the snow was melting into mud in New Hampshire, I traveled to Boston, where everyone was strolling along the harbor or sitting on benches licking ice cream cones. But I quit the blessed sunlight for the moist, dim sanctuary of the New England Aquarium. I had a date with a giant Pacific octopus. Such a good book. I highly recommend this. And again, the audios of this are fantastic, but the physical books are just so pretty and well put together. So whichever route you decide to go, you won't go wrong. But I would strongly encourage you read a Sy Montgomery book at some point, because she is just a fantastic person. I would love to get coffee with her someday. She seems like such a kind, empathetic person. And if you follow along, you know that those are qualities that I really prize in the world and with people, but also in literature. So I absolutely love her. Love her, love her, love her. I was browsing through my local used bookstore and saw a copy of Home in hardcover by Marilyn Robinson, with a bookmark from the Elliott Bay Book Company inside, which is funny because I live in Montana, so not too far. And it is the first edition of it, so I had to grab this. I called Gilead the best book of the last 25 years. I'll link that video in the description box down below. And I haven't read any of the other books in the sort of connected series of novels that Marilyn Robinson has subsequently done. So this would be a great one to get around to. Let me not lose the Elliott Bay Book Company bookmark. Here's what it says. Hundreds of thousands of readers were enthralled and delighted by the luminous, tender voice of John Ames in Gilead, Marilyn Robinson's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. Home is an entirely independent, deeply affecting work that takes place concurrently in the same Iowa town, this time in the household of Reverend Robert Boughton, Ames's closest friend. Glory Boughton, age 38, has returned to Gilead to care for her dying father. Soon, her brother Jack, the prodigal son of the family, gone 20 years, comes home too, looking for refuge and trying to make peace with a past littered with trouble and pain. Jack is one of the great characters in recent literature. A bad boy from childhood, an alcoholic who cannot hold a job, he is perpetually at odds with his surroundings and with his traditionalist father, though he remains Boughton's most beloved child. Brilliant, lovable, and wayward, Jack forges an intense bond with Glory and engages painfully with John Ames, his godfather and namesake. Home is a moving and healing book about families, family secrets, and the passing of generations, about love and death and faith. It is Robinson's greatest work, an unforgettable embodiment of the deepest and most universal emotions. And again, if you know me, you know I love a book about families, family secrets, passing of generations, and all of that stuff. So I am really looking forward to diving back into Marilyn Robinson at some point and exploring these connected novels deeper. Here's how it begins. Home to stay, Glory. Yes, her father said, and her heart sank. He attempted a twinkle of joy at this thought, but his eyes were damp with commiseration. To stay for a while this time, he amended, and took her bag from her, first shifting his cane to his weaker hand. Dear God, she thought, dear God in heaven. So began and ended all her prayers these days, which were really cries of amazement. How could her father be so frail? And how could he be so recklessly intent on satisfying his notions of gentlemanliness, hanging his cane on the railing of the stairs so he could, dear God, carry her bag up to her room? But he did it, and then he stood by the door, collecting himself. That's the opening of Home by Marilyn Robinson. I was also looking through my local used bookstore and realized I used to have a copy of Disgrace, which I want to reread, and I don't have it anymore. So I was browsing through the J.M. Coetzee section and saw Waiting for the Barbarians. They have not had a copy of Disgrace, but I'm holding out for that one. And I've heard really great things about this. I used to collect these Penguin Great Books of the 20th Century editions, because I just think they're really pretty, and they have the French flaps that I love in a paperback. They do have deckled edges, which I'm not a huge fan of, but, you know, beggars can't be choosers. So I've heard really good things about it. It's a tiny little thing. I figure I could probably fit it in at some point, so I grabbed it, and it's here. And now at some point I'll get around to it. This to me is a library builder. I don't have immediate plans to get to it, but it will be here when I eventually am ready for it. So I forgot to mention the publishers of the last two books. So The Soul of an Octopus is published by Atria, and FSG published Home. This is obviously Penguin. Here's the description of Waiting for the Barbarians. Set in an isolated outpost on the edge of a great empire, Waiting for the Barbarians is a startling allegory of the war between oppressor and oppressed. The magistrate, the novel's fascinating narrator, has been a loyal servant of the empire, running the affairs of the frontier settlement, dabbling in antiquarianism, and ignoring constant reports of a threat from the barbarians who inhabit the uncharted deserts beyond the village. But when military personnel arrive with captured barbarians, he becomes a witness to a cruel and unjust defense of the empire. Outraged, and with military command controlling his village, powerless to prevent the persecution of the barbarians, he finds himself involved in an affair with one of the victims, a girl crippled, blinded, and orphaned by the torturers. Their relationship, intimate but devoid of true understanding, finally pushes him to a quixotic act of rebellion that brands him an enemy of the state. Rendered in an austere but richly suggestive prose, Coetzee's novel addresses universal political and philosophical issues of war and justice. And here is how it begins. Chapter 1. I have never seen anything like it. 2 little discs of glass suspended in front of his eyes in loops of wire. Is he blind? I could understand it if he wanted to hide blind eyes. But he is not blind. The discs are dark. They look opaque from the outside, but he can see through them. He tells me they are a new invention. They protect one's eyes against the glare of the sun, he says. You would find them useful out here in the desert. They save one from squinting all the time. One has fewer headaches. Look. He touches the corners of his eyes lightly. No wrinkles. We'll stop there. Interesting beginning to the book. It is 152 pages, so just a slim little thing, and should be very doable to read. We have 2 more books. Next is Edna O'Brien, The Little Red Chairs. I mentioned that I'm trying to read Irish authors before we go to Ireland. I definitely want to read The Country Girls, but I've heard so many good things about Edna O'Brien that I figured it wouldn't hurt to have another one of her books. This is published by Faber, I believe. Yeah, Faber and Faber. Here's what it says on the back. When a man who calls himself a faith healer arrives in a small West Coast Irish village, the community is soon under the spell of this charismatic stranger from the Balkans. One woman in particular, Fidelma McBride, becomes enthralled in a fatal attraction that leads to unimaginable consequences. I've heard so many good things about Edna O'Brien over the years that I'm really hoping I manage to cram in some of her books. I would definitely start with Country Girls, which my library has a copy of. But this will do in a pinch. Here is how it begins. The town takes its name from the river. The current, swift and dangerous, surges with manic glee, chunks of wood and logs of ice borne along its trail. In the small sidings where water is trapped, stones, blue, black, and purple, shine up out of the riverbed, perfectly smoothed and rounded, and it is as though seeing a clutch of good-sized eggs in a bucket of water. The noise is deafening. It's The Little Red Chairs by Edna O'Brien. The final book is Clouds of Witness by Dorothy L. Sayers. I recently read the first book in this series, which follows Lord Peter Wimsey, a detective, and I thought it was okay. Someone did comment to say that the next book follows more of the classic whodunit style, and I really am a fan of that sort of classic whodunit style. So it will be interesting to see if I get along a little bit better with this one at some point. This edition is published by Perennial Library. Here's what it says on the back. Rustic old Riddlesdale Lodge was a whimsy family retreat filled with country pleasures and the thrill of the hunt, until the game turned up human and quite dead. He lay among the chrysanthemums, wore slippers and a dinner jacket, and was Lord Peter's brother-in-law to be. His accused murderer was Wimsey's own brother, and if murder set all in the family wasn't enough to boggle the unflappable Lord Wimsey, perhaps a few twists of fate would be. A mysterious vanishing midnight letter from Egypt, a grieving fiancé with suitcase in hand, and a bullet destined for one very special Wimsey. So we'll see if I get along a little bit better with this one. I do kind of have a soft spot for these vintage covers, so that appeals to me a bit. Here is how this book begins. Chapter 1 of His Malice Aforethought. And there's a quote. "Oh, who hath done this deed? Othello." Lord Peter Wimsey stretched himself luxuriously between the sheets provided by the Hotel Maurice. After his exertions in the unraveling of the Battersea mystery, he had followed Sir Julian Freke's advice and had taken a holiday. He had felt suddenly weary of breakfasting every morning before his view over the Green Park. He had realized that the picking up of first editions at sales afforded insufficient exercise for a man of 33. The very crimes of London were over-sophisticated. That is, Clouds of Witness by Dorothy L. Sayers. So, those are all the books I brought into my library in the month of December. If you have thoughts, recommendations, or anything like that, let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back until next time. Happy reading.